Many people say that the reason why there are so many young and successful entrepreneurs is because of their gumption, their willingness to risk it all at a time in their life when they have little to lose. While that might be perhaps part of it, it isn't the whole story. So we thought we would go right to the source, the young maverick entrepreneurs themselves. With us here today is Pete Cashmore. Pete is the founder and CEO of Mashable, an award-winning site and one of the largest and most popular destinations for digital, social media, and technology news and information. He has been named in the Time Magazine 100 list of the most influential people and as a Forbes Magazine Web Celeb 25. Pete, welcome to Success, my friend. We are really excited to have you here and gracing the cover of this month's issue of Success as well. Welcome.
That's really exciting. Thanks so much.
So quite a few entrepreneurs we've talked to didn't intend to start their own business. They just got started doing something they found interesting and it led to a few twists and turns that led them to where they are now. So how about you? Did you have any other youthful business ventures that led you to where you are now?
I did, actually. I did a few things. So I saw a documentary on the BBC about a guy who was importing these Razor scooters, and he'd become the UK distributor of Razor scooters. And I thought that was pretty exciting. So I tried to become the UK distributor of these smoke ring guns. They were called smoke blasters. And I ended up with all these smoke blasters turning up in my parents' house. And they were very confused about why we suddenly had hundreds of these samples of these guns that fired smoke rings that I was trying to get distributed. Suffice to say, they didn't get distributed, and they're still probably sitting in the attic somewhere, just boxes and boxes of these things. But it's, it was fun to try a few business ventures. I had an eBay store. I did, ebooks, which was far too early for ebooks, I think. But what I loved about that was that you could essentially set up your email client to automatically send a digital product, right? So you'd get the order in, you'd register that someone had paid, and then you could automatically send off the book. The challenge with that is I was using my parents' computer, and I'd have to tell them to leave the computer on all night, or otherwise the books wouldn't send, and I'd have angry customers in the morning. So that was kind of my first taste of a purely digital business. And then, of course, I started writing online. I was really into technology. Like you say, I didn't necessarily want to make a business of Mashable. I just thought, well, if I start writing about this stuff, I can learn about it. And if I'm learning about it anyway, why wouldn't I just write about it publicly on a blog? So I set up a WordPress blog. You just install it on a server, start writing, and that was kind of the start of Mashable. But I never imagined that would become the business. I thought, well, once I get really good at this, then I can start a business, but I'm not really good enough right now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Some of your early harebrained ideas sound like many of the early harebrained ideas I had as an entrepreneur, except for I was probably a decade too early when it came to the transitioning all that into digital. So fascinating evolution. So now I'm interested in your view of this. It seems that the age of entrepreneurs tends to be trending lower. Why do you think that is? What do you think is driving youth today to start their own businesses?
Well, I think it's definitely the case that people are starting earlier, although some of the studies that we've seen at Mashable actually tend to show that once people have a bit of experience, that's really their peak, that older entrepreneurs actually may have more success because they do have the experience. But I think the opportunity to start early is really about, at least from my perspective, it's about having access to a broad number of customers with very few resources, right? There's much lower barriers to entry in the digital world than there are in the physical world. So it doesn't really matter, even if you're not tackling technology directly, if you want to start a fashion company or you want to start a shoe store, you want to do marketing or whatever industry you might be in, the internet gives you access to a lot of people very, very quickly. Yeah. So I think that's really what's changed, is not so much... it's the physical world is so much less efficient than the digital world that getting started has a much lower barrier, and people who might have had to spend a lot of time building up a lot of capital, asking people, convincing people to give them money, can now start with no money just on their own free will.
Yeah, exactly. I know that even in the digital world, back when I started, you had to raise at least $1 million, and your technology, web platforms, and systems were at least a few $100,000, and literally all those, the exact same tools are available. Most of it is open source, but for under $5,000, you have the power of what we used to have to raise $1 million for, and we're only talking about 10 to 20 years ago. So that's an extraordinary evolution. So How do you think your youth has been an asset and then also maybe a roadblock at times when it came to building Mashable and now continuing its development and growth?
Yeah, I'd agree that it can be both. I think what's great about being young is you don't know things, and what's bad about being young is you don't know things, and that can essentially be a benefit or a big drawback. I mean, one of the things that is good about entering a new industry when you're fairly young is you don't have any of the kind of the preconceptions of how things should be, so you just do it the most obvious way, and that can actually be quite refreshing and can bring new ideas to the table. You know, when I think back on Mashable, I could have done it much faster if only I'd known certain things, right? I spend a lot of time doing things the inefficient way to then do it the efficient way. But I think the main thing I kind of learned starting young, or was able to do starting young, is I was prepared to put effort in where maybe others wouldn't. I mean, I would work, you know, all day, every day. I would, because I was in Scotland, I would work on West Coast time, so I would sleep a few hours in the morning, then work maybe, 18 hours, then try and sleep in the morning, then get up again. And I just didn't know anything else. And, as you said earlier, I didn't have that many opportunities, and, I had the willingness to, and the drive to really get into this industry because it was my only chance of getting into the industry. So I think I also just had the willingness to do some very repetitive, very tough work and very tough schedules, which, even when I think about it now, I think, wow, could I even do that anymore? Could I sleep that little and just keep, kind of grinding away at the same thing every single day, trying to write 8 articles, 10 articles every single day, and keep the momentum going for so long? Because it was 18 months to 2 years. It was probably 18 months before I got another writer on board. So I was doing that kind of pattern for a long time. And even then it was, once I started getting more writers on, I was still involved in the editorial on Mashable, which is the day-to-day breaking news, very reactive, very, very fast pace, for maybe about 4 or 5 years of the company. And we're about 7 years in now. So for most of the company, I was actually, right in the edit desk trying to react to news all the time. And it's very tiring. And I think back, well, could I do that now that I know what I know? Would I be as motivated? I don't know.
I want to go back to something you said, and that is, you said certainly your advantage was your willingness to work crazy hours with little sleep, and that was your advantage. And then you also said that the downside was that you wish you knew certain things back then that you know now. So if you were knee to knee with a brand new entrepreneur, and they're young and they're hungry and they're willing to do that crazy work, but if you could fill in some of the gaps of what you know now that you wish you knew then, what would be 2 or 3 things that you'd tell that young, eager entrepreneur?
Well, I think one of the challenges I had was I didn't know anyone, right? And that's one of the biggest challenges starting out, because I was remote, because I couldn't meet people in the industry. The way people typically start companies is they go out, they meet people in the industry, they form a team, they have a co-founder, they try and get some capital behind the venture so that they don't have to work so many hours, or they can at least distribute the load a little bit. That's the classic way. I didn't really have that option when I was starting out, so I had to do it very resourcefully. I think for me it was a good learning experience because once you've learned to work with nothing, it becomes much easier to work with something and to be very efficient in the way you allocate resources. So I think for me, there wasn't really an option as such, but if people do have the opportunity to live where the action is, if you're in technology, it's, got to be one of the cities like San Francisco or New York or in Silicon Valley. I think being around the people who are in the industry gives you a huge head start and lets you maybe distribute the workload a little bit faster. I didn't really have that opportunity, and it was the biggest thing that kind of slowed down the company's growth, is that I had to do multiple roles for a long, long time. So I think that's always key, is trying to find people who can replace you as quickly as possible, because there's always going to be other work to do.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about Mashable. Aside from providing news, you've always emphasized that you want Mashable to add value to the people that visit the site. Explain that more. How does Mashable go about adding value?
Yeah, so early on in Mashable we covered, and we've had this evolution of sorts where early on it was about, I was excited about technology primarily, and how the internet was changing everything. So I covered web startups. Then I went on to kind of widen and cover, established tech companies and tech startups. Then social media came along, and Mashable became more broadly about, well, how does social change everything? And in the past 4 years or so, we've kind of treated social as a horizontal, right? Social media, digital media, the fact that everyone is a publisher and is empowered and can be part of a global conversation. How does that change all the verticals? Thinking of it more like the industrial revolution. Well, this is the digital revolution. And while it might seem like it's just technology, it's changing every area of our lives. So we launched channels like, business or entertainment, talking about, well, what are people saying about movies and music online? Or how are people reacting to, the Oscars or whatever award ceremony happens to be on at the time? So really thinking of social and digital and how it's affecting the whole world. And we've been launching channels across virtually every vertical, from business to entertainment to social good, the charity work people are doing online, and talking about how social runs through it. So when we talk about, well, what is Mashable trying to do to add more value or be different from an existing magazine? What we're really about is community. And we've tried to build in ways for our audience to share our articles more, to react to our articles more, and to be engaged in the conversation. So some of the things we do, obviously we were on social very early and realized that was a big opportunity. We let people consume our content all over the web, from, whether they want to post pictures on Pinterest, or whether they want to tweet our stories, which they've been doing for a long time, or share them on Facebook, any kind of ways of engaging. But we also invert that, and we let users submit things sometimes. So we'll do things like contests where people will submit their best Instagram photos, really building out pieces where people can feel part of the news and not just be reacting to the news.
Your organization, Mashable, has experienced exponential growth since you founded it. So give us 2 or 3 things that your company has done, you think, that has encouraged and generated this terrific growth.
Yeah, I think the key thing comes back to community. It comes back to, well, how do you, if you have a very small team, get a lot of reach and affect a lot of people? And I think the way you do that is you listen to what they want. And social media is incredibly powerful. Sites like Twitter, you can really listen to, what are people thinking about your stories? What do they want more of? What do they want less of? And that's allowed us to grow a great deal, because essentially our readers are the marketing vehicle. We don't have any marketing dollars. It's all about the readers. If they like stuff, they will share it. So if we listen to them, then we create the stuff that they really will find useful, find value in, then they will share it more. So there's kind of a cycle that goes on there. And that's really at the core of what Mashable is. It's about serving a community. The web gives you a lot more data about what people want, about how your readers are reacting in real time, and you can change course very, very quickly. So I think that's probably the key thing that's allowed Mashable to grow, despite having a relatively small team compared to how many readers we have. Beyond that, I think we've embraced those tools a great deal, and increasingly we're embracing technology, right? So we have this new design that came out in late 2012 where we, work very well on mobile phones. We embrace social in a new way, where we're actually ranking our stories based on what's being shared a great deal and what's about to be hot in the next couple hours. So really thinking in terms of the social piece, and now increasingly mobile, and how you serve to all these people who are consuming on the go. I think those two pieces are truly unique and really differentiate us as a news organization.
So let's talk about the last 8 years with this tremendous success and scale of growth that you've undergone, and being on the cutting edge of technology and social and the web and the internet and so forth presents its own dynamic challenge. So what would you say were your greatest challenges? Looking back, things that you could have done a little bit different, or would have made you more efficient or more effective, or you'd be bigger than you are today if you'd done something or another differently. What are some of those look back lessons learned, so to speak?
I think for me, a great deal of it is just moving faster, right? Because it's really been a learning process for me. And that was the intent of starting the company, was, well, I'll learn about technology and, maybe at some point I'll be good at it. I think we have had to learn on the job and figure things out and try things and see if they worked and react that way. I think I could have done things a lot faster if I'd known the things I know now, and I knew the ways to do things very efficiently and less repetitively, and to move things forward faster. And I think, I initially came from it understanding purely the pieces that were online, right? So I could understand if I could read another site or I could read content online, then that made sense to me. And now I'm increasingly learning about the offline pieces, which is how do you actually run a company and interact with people and do the very kind of the physical stuff. You have an office, you have people. How do you move that piece forward? So I probably would have done a similar thing, just faster. And, I've always known where I wanted to go. I wanted to get better at the technology side because I feel like that's what's changing media. And I wanted to get better at the advertising side because I was basically based in, writing things, and that's what I understood. So I probably would have tried to learn those things faster and really build those parts of the company faster. But, I don't think with what I knew I could have done that at the time.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice for those that are listening and can learn the lessons earlier on. So I read in another interview you did where you said, quote, you only need more than a 50% hit rate to be successful. It's mistakes that will teach you the way, end quote, which we definitely embrace that mantra here at Success. So curious for you to share one or two mistakes that you made along the way and what lessons you learned that you'd pass forward to those listening now.
I think bizarrely, and that quote kind of talks to it, one of my mistakes was probably to be too afraid of mistakes. And that was probably, why I said that quote, which is that it's true that if you have more than the 50% hit rate on any decision making that you're going to ultimately be successful. I think Mashable, ironically, somewhat pursued a fairly low risk strategy because we were very resource constrained. We could only take a few little bets, and if any of our bets went wrong, then we could have killed the whole company. So there weren't a huge number of, okay, let's risk the whole company kind of bets early on. It was just about survival. So when I said that, I was probably thinking with regard to, I wish I'd been more decisive about things when it's very clear which direction you should have. And I think that's one of the things I've gotten much better at now that I have the years of experience. I can look at a situation, think back to 3 or 4 situations I had in the past that virtually match that situation. I can be very decisive about, okay, this is the way we have to go, and it can be very black and white. I think early on, we spent a long time kind of half doing things, seeing if they worked, not really committing, trying to, get as much information as possible. Well, if we wait a few more days, if we wait a few more weeks, maybe we'll know if this new hire is going to work out or if this new strategy is going to be successful. So I think with regard to mistakes, I almost didn't make enough of them. And I also, didn't come from an entrepreneurial culture as such. So for me, initially, failure was a big deal. Oh, if this company fails, it's going to be disastrous. I won't have a career. And Silicon Valley and the web culture and the new business culture actually accepts failure, doesn't discriminate against failure and sees failure as a way of learning lessons. So even in Silicon Valley, if you've had a company or two that failed, it doesn't necessarily exclude you from getting venture capital or starting a new one. In fact, people kind of look on that somewhat favorably and say, well, you're not going to make those mistakes again. You've learned the best way of doing things through doing them less well. So that's kind of my view on mistakes, and I couldn't necessarily name, huge mistakes I made because I didn't take the huge risks. And in a way, it might have been better to take more risks, make more mistakes, and learn faster.
Well, it's a great answer anyhow. So this is interesting. You started out as a writer and as a blogger, and you built this, and now you've got this very significant media company, essentially, and you've got a large staff and you reach a wide audience and you're running a business. So you went from, an individual operator, which is true of a lot of entrepreneurs. They started doing something that they were really good at. And then all of a sudden they find themselves thrust into a position of having to lead, having to be a CEO, having to run a large operation. What did you do to develop yourself to become a leader? What was the process of you going from, single operator to leader of a large organization? What were some of the development issues that you had to deal with?
So I think one of the greatest challenges there's a lot of challenges. Firstly, not only was I going from a situation of running the whole thing myself to having a team of about 100 people. I think there was also the transition. Well, I was a kid living in Scotland. I came to the US. It was a completely different culture. I had to, get a visa to work, and I had to set up the company in the US, and I had to adjust to life in the US, and then I had to adjust to, working in an office, which I'd never done. I mean, for the first 3 years or so of Mashable, I actually didn't meet any of the people I worked with. So we're a completely remote company and we all worked in different places. And over the years, that's been actually a huge personal transition of, interacting with people in an office environment. It might seem very normal to people who are in the workforce right now, but to me, as someone who worked online the whole time and got very, very adept at using these online tools for communication, that was a big transition. But I think the biggest challenge of moving from an individual operator to a company is figuring out, well, how do you transfer your knowledge? How do you be a teacher to other people so that they can learn from your experience and do things to the level you want things done, but at the same time, trust them and give them control and hire the right people who you can trust to do that, right? So it's a huge balance because you really want to teach people as much as you possibly can and for them to get as good as they can, as quickly as they can. But by the same token, you can't be on people's backs the whole time and saying, well, you should have done it this way. And, this sentence isn't quite right. Can you change it? You need to strike that balance between teaching people and helping people and mentoring people and not being that kind of that micromanager who's down in the weeds all the time and getting down to the very low level of the very specifics of the company. So it's always about that balance of how do you be strategic and how do you also take care of the smaller things, the very niche pieces of the business. And that's always, I think, an ongoing battle because occasionally you'll see, well, I don't think this article was quite in our voice, or I don't think this particular decision was necessarily the one I would have taken. But by the same token, you can't be involved in every single piece of the business at a certain scale.
Yeah.
And I think that's what all entrepreneurs struggle with when they move from being an individual to being a larger company. And so it's a balance.
That's a great answer. So before I ask the final question for you today, I'd love for you to share with us what the word success means for you in your life. How do you define success?
So I think one of the important things about success is that it's not an external thing. And I think for a long time, I thought it was an external thing, that it was external validation. You talk about, you have these various opportunities as an entrepreneur to be very, very rich, for instance, or to have some other external validation to, whatever it might be. Some people might want to, become famous or well known on a more mainstream level, or they might just want to, you get multiple opportunities to make a lot of money and to just say, okay, that's what I want to achieve. But you've got to define your own head before those opportunities come along, what your definition of success is and what you want to be. And for me, it's about how do I constantly progress? How do I be constantly better than I was yesterday? And I think it also has an aspect of people associate happiness with success, or that one day they're going to reach a plateau of success. That never really happens because, even entrepreneurs like me, we hear people like you say, oh, you're doing so well and it's great. But we don't really internalize that. We just keep saying, well, I'm not as good as, this other company or this person's actually doing a bit better and is innovating more this week. Or so you've got to also have a very centered sense of success that doesn't rely on comparisons to others. Wherever you get to, you're going to always have people in your vicinity who are more successful than you, right? I could live in rural Scotland and be, one of the people who is, maybe I'd be the top tech person in Bankery, Scotland. Maybe that would be the thing. But you move to New York and you realize that there's a lot of successful people here, and you can't spend your whole time comparing yourself to others and saying, as you move up the ladder, say, well, and you see this a lot with people who get very rich. They say, well, I'm a multimillionaire, but my friend's a billionaire, so now I'm unhappy. I think that's the two factors of success that people really have to rely on. Firstly, you have to have your own definition of it and not let others define it, because then you're going to say, well, I need money or I need to be famous. And you'll get those things and you'll find this strange sense of unhappiness come over you because you realize that's not what you wanted at all. For me, the definition is, well, I always want to be better than I was yesterday. And that also has the aspect of don't compare yourselves to others, right? Don't look at what other people did and say, well, I want to be them, because when you are them, you'll realize that there's a lot more successful people around you now, and you always compare yourself to those people, and you always put yourself down. And that's really what success is to me. It's very much defined for me. And what I would like to do through my work eventually, if I keep progressing and being better every day, is make some kind of dent in the world. And that's what I think most tech entrepreneurs want to do. You hear it a lot that tech entrepreneurs really don't care that much about money. It's something that started very early in the Silicon Valley days, when they were really compelled to just make a difference in the world and to leave the world having achieved something that moved the world forward in some small way, that changed how people lived their lives, that gave them a better quality of life, or maybe in some big scale, helped human progress, helped humanity take even a small step forward. So that would be my hope in the whole scheme of things, in the whole scheme of success, that maybe one day, if I keep getting better and better, then I will actually make a lasting difference in the world that outlives me, that continues to help people. And, I can be fairly humble about that and say, well, it may be a very small thing, but I'd at least like to create something that lasts eventually.
Well, it's a fantastic answer, as well as a very inspiring one. So thank you for sharing that. So one final question for you today. If you had another young entrepreneur in front of you who's just getting started, and it's something that would be a guiding principle for them, so 6 or 9 months or 12 or 18 months later, they still have at the front of their head, this is what Pete Cashmore told me, and it's paid off, it's worked. This has been that guiding principle that has made the big difference to me being successful versus maybe me struggling or maybe failing altogether. What would be that key guiding principle?
I think the core thing that I have learned, and I historically have been very bad at taking advice, so I probably, if I heard it, wouldn't even take my own advice. But what I've learned, and that's what entrepreneurs are often like, they often just go their own way anyway. What I've learned at its core is you can't be successful at something you're not passionate about. And that sounds very kind of cliche, but it is to say, you can't be somebody else. If you want to be successful at something, you have to make it a habit. You have to do it repeatedly. People always ask in these kind of interviews, well, what was the breakthrough moment? Or how did you know you suddenly made it? Or did you wake up one morning and suddenly you were hugely successful and you have millions of readers and millions of dollars? It doesn't really work like that. It's a process that's ongoing, and you need to be able to make it a habit. So I've often looked at the world and said, wow, I wish I could be more like that person and do more of that stuff. I wish I could run my business more like this person who's very much of this personality type. Well, there's some fundamentals of who you are that you can't change. There's some fundamental habits that you can't change. And what I've been able to do or what I've tried to do is build really useful, productive habits to find out, what am I passionate about? What could I do day in, day out that I wouldn't get bored of? And that if I kept doing it, I would actually make progress there. Which is really a very long-winded way of saying, you might look at the way other people have been successful. It's probably not the way you're going to be successful, because you need to really focus in a competitive landscape on what are you best at and what are you most passionate about, and combine those two things. You have to pursue what you're passionate about, but not only that, you have to pursue it in a way that fits who you are. You're not, even though you can do things that you don't like for long periods of time, really you're always going to steer back to the things that you enjoy, the problems that you really want to solve. And you've got to be successful in your own way. You can't base your life on someone else's success. You've got to be successful in your own way, with your own assets, your own flaws, and of course your own talents.
Wonderful. Well, Mr. Pete Cashmore, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your insights, and your inspiration with us here at Success. Thanks so much for being with us, Pete. We really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Success Magazine Audio, copyright Success Media, all rights reserved.